right. Good evening. How's everybody doing? All right, that was okay. My name is Dave, and our group is our broader community, popping the OPRF bubble. And before we get into the presentation, I'd love for our team to introduce ourselves to you and share where you live and also where we volunteer or work.
Good afternoon, my name is Victoria Van. I live in Gilwood and I work in Chicago.
Hi, I'm Carrie Cook. I live in Oak Park and I volunteer in Oak Park and River Forest.
Hi, I'm Christina Rogers. I work in Uptown Chicago and I live in Oak Park.
And my name is Dave, and I live in Elmwood Park and I work in Galewood. And our project began with an email that was actually sent by somebody who I believe is in this room. Is Michelle Patak in this room by chance? Oh, wait, she is. She's standing right over there, all right? Not to make this awkward, hello, Michelle. I received your email on April the 10th. It is starred in my Google. I have not replied to the email, all right? Yes, all right, this is good. So, but she had a great email to me, and it said this: as leadership alums and as a resident of Elmwood Park, I want to bring the community level problem solving that this program, offers into my own or into our community. What are your thoughts on the effectiveness of having other EP residents participate in the existing Leadership Lab program? In other words, do you find that as a participant, will there be an ability to extrapolate, great word, Michelle, what you learned and or connections you made one village over in Elmwood Park? And as I received that email, probably some of the reason that I didn't reply right away is because that is a really deep question that we as a group were discussing and trying to understand of that as the program exists, Leadership Lab, is it something that can go into other communities and is beneficial for those who don't live in the Oak Park, River Forest area? But before we jump into that question, I want to ask maybe a different question. Because I think for us, when we talk about community and being a part of community, that is something that has changed. It's been defined in a new way. So think about this, maybe looking back at your week. I know it's the weekend and you're excited about having some beautiful days in Chicago on the weekend, right? But looking back on this last week, where did you go? Where did you spend your time? When somebody comes to visit you, what's like the restaurant that you take them to that like really says Chicago? If you practice worship or religion, do you stay in your neighborhood or community, or do you go to a place that's more kind of your style and what you prefer? When you shop for groceries, do you go to a place that's only in your neighborhood, or do you cross over into another community? And see, if I were to be willing to guess what's going on in your head, what was going on in our head, is that we've really redefined what community looks like. Sure, we live in a neighborhood system, but the reality is that we cross over those barriers all the time into differing places and areas. And so, one of the challenges that we have is that we cross boundaries every single day. We don't live in bubbles. And as a result, we won't solve complex problems by working within just the boundaries. And one of the complex problems that we have is leadership tools and skills. Are they only for people in a certain geographical area? So what we kind of came to see as our problem is simply this. How do we redefine what it means to be a community leader? If community has been redefined, then how is being a leader redefined as well?
All right, so again, good afternoon, I'm Victoria, and one way of redefining what a community leader is to obviously collect data. So we put together a survey, and we surveyed both our current cohort and our previous fellows. 59 participated. We had 7 questions, and really it was about the curriculum. if we want to extend our boundaries and go beyond Oak Park River Forest and really develop leaders around our bordering communities, what would they be interested in? And how could we make sure that we're relatable and really pressing forward by targeting in on those issues at hand? So, we also conducted some interviews in addition to the surveys. I'm not going to read everyone's name here because I don't pronounce everyone's name, so let's just run that in line, just work with me. But I do want to call for the folks who participated. We have political figures here, we have well-known community leaders and activists here, leading non-for-profits, executive directors who all participated in the interviews. And some of the trends were the curriculum. When I asked if they would be interested in maybe participating in the leadership lab, what that looks like to them, they immediately asked, well, what does the curriculum entail? And does the curriculum speak to my community? In other words, not just Oak Park and River Forest, but does it speak to the Austin area? Does it speak to the Elmwood area? All these different areas where they live and even what they consider as their community, does it speak to them? Does it address their issues? They also want to know about the partnerships. And when we say partnerships, Perry's going to elaborate a little bit more about that. But really, what does it look like if we decided to expand the Community Leadership Lab outside of Oak Park River Forest, right? And then more importantly, how do we build those community partnerships, genuine community partnerships, where you have folks at the table saying, let's rebuild and co-author this curriculum so that it meets the needs of everyone involved.
All right, so for the survey, we got, like Victoria said, we had 59 participants, so many of you are probably in this room, so thank you for completing it. And one of the main questions we asked was, what would you think, how would you feel if the curriculum were expanded to include a broader geographic region? And so 64% of people said that they would be more interested. So that's very great. And then two noted concerns were the relevancy of the current curriculum, which Victoria kind of spoke about. Also, we gleaned that from some of the interviews. And then the second one was a less focused network. And so here's the breakdown of that question I just posed. 40.7% said that they would be much more interested in the program if it were expanded. And another 23.7% said that they would be interested ultimately. So that means 64% of people really are interested in this. And I think that's noteworthy because our participants in this program, the fellows, tend to be from Oak Park River Forest. Our current cohort is about half from Oak Park River Forest and then half elsewhere. And so there's a real desire to expand the curriculum. And we heard a lot of great, honest feedback, too, throughout these surveys. So some of the opportunities that were mentioned were that they would be able to build bridges between communities, enable projects to have a broader impact, serve underserved communities, and pop the Oak Park bubble. So that really became our theme and our anthem throughout this. And we wanted to share one quote in particular. I think it would provide additional knowledge of communities adjacent to Oak Park. We talk all the time about building bridges to neighboring communities. Seems like Leadership Lab would be a great place to start doing that. Understanding that people's experiences and resources differ from town to town is important. However, there also were some concerns, so we're going to share some of those too. Fewer connections in Oak Park River Forest, so it makes it more difficult to stay in contact with them after the program ends, and also that it would dilute the experience. And we pulled a quote too to share. I really don't know anything about, say, Elmwood Park, and honestly, I don't really care. My focus is closer to home.
So, here's what we came to is even though there were some negative comments, we think, there's also a large interest in expanding to other areas in leadership. How do we take Leadership Lab and translate it to other areas so that we can empower and raise up leaders in those communities as well and look at a future of what Leadership Lab could be? So we looked at a few different models. We worked with John Halseal and Carrie Summy to think of how are ways that we could do this. And we came up with 3 different models and explored those: the bubble model, the seesaw model, and the spoke model. In the bubble model, Leadership Lab remains similar to how it is now. We bring in people from other communities, we bring them to Oak Park, and we just incorporate those areas into the curriculum that we have with the tweaks of bringing in more leaders and more speakers from other areas, food from other areas that we enjoyed, and visiting places from other areas, and bringing in government officials from other areas to hear from how they run their municipalities. What we felt, what we also heard those concerns from people though, that they worried about the dilution of the program and the intimacy and the impact of working in one local area and using Oak Park as that case study. We also worried about the applicability of, if you're just studying Oak Park, is that going to translate to how I do things in Galewood with a different, base of people? So we ultimately felt like this wasn't the model that we wanted to go with. The second model we looked at was the seesaw model. And what happens with the seesaw model is that you have a cohort that's with mixed fellows, where you have half of the, Oak Park partners with another community. Say if half of the cohort would be from Oak Park River Forest and the other half would be from maybe Austin. And you would experience the things that we did in Oak Park, and then you would seesaw back to Austin in those same experiences and go back and forth and exchange ideas together. But what we decided was that we thought that this might lead to a bit of a comparison, and people have different bases and values and issues, and we didn't want to go down a road that might lead to compare the two. But it also doesn't address the broader community because it's just the two areas. So we ultimately decided not on the seesaw model. And lastly, the one is the spoke model, which is the one we would recommend, the one that we liked. What happens is if you envision Leadership Lab like a wheel, and Oak Park River Forest is the model in the hub of the wheel, and we're sending out spokes to other communities where you establish cohorts in those other areas. What we need to be sensitive, though, is that we don't want to railroad ourselves into those communities, that this is how we do it, and this is how that this works. What we want to do is remain sensitive to those areas and what their needs are. Another way to do that also is to build up Leadership Lab underneath agencies and organizations that are already existing, so we're not replicating what's already there and working. We also might think that there's, aren't we just creating another silo in Galewood? Are we just creating another silo in Austin? But what needs to be implemented in these things is to make sure that there's collaboration between the different cohorts, that we're raising leaders that can work together and solve problems also that transcend the Oak Park River Forest area and others. We think that in this model, we're hearing the concerns of losing, the intimacy, but I also think that we can broaden to our larger community and create leaders and change that way, but also keep the intimacy of those things together. What we experienced the last 10 months was very impactful and leadership forming, and we think that we could benefit by bringing all those things together in a broader community, especially if you work and play in different places. You have a stake in all these areas.
All right, so we're coming around the home base, all right? You guys still with me? Oh, that's really bad. Yeah. You guys still, thank you. If I had a prize, I would give it to you, but I don't, but yay. All right, so here's the reflective questions that I want you guys to ponder in closing. Number one, what is an ideal community leader? We've been tossing these really jazzy names and really cool, slogans, diversity, inclusion, community leadership. But what is a community leader to you? Okay, you've been here for a year, right? And I would like to know that later on over drinks. Not now. And then the second question is, how do you define community? Is a community where you live, where you work? Is it your village? Is it your family? What is a community to you? And the final question is impact. Impact, impact, impact. What is your impact? What are you going to do with the tools that you've learned? How are you going to affect change for tomorrow? Not just for Oak Park, not just for River Forest, but for the greater community. So, let's pop the bubble of Oak Park and River Forest, and I challenge you to trailblaze into your tomorrow and affect change on a national level. Thank you.